I open my eyes as morning arrives, and immediately I feel that familiar pull toward my phone sitting on the nightstand. My hand almost reaches for it out of pure habit, but then I remember something important. Even if I were to turn that screen brightness all the way up to maximum, even if I stared at that glowing rectangle for several minutes, it simply wouldn't provide what my body actually needs at this crucial moment of the day. The light emanating from that device, as bright as it might seem in my dark bedroom, lacks the intensity required to jumpstart the biological processes that will set me up for success over the next 16 or so hours. Brain needs a specific signal, a particular quality and quantity of light that will trigger a cascade of hormonal and neurological events. And my phone screen just isn't capable of delivering that signal, no matter how advanced the technology might be. Instead of reaching for that phone, instead of lying there scrolling through notifications or checking messages or reading news, I make a different choice. I push back the covers, swing my legs over the side of the bed, stand up, and make my way toward the door that leads outside. This might seem like a simple action, almost trivially easy, but it represents one of the most powerful interventions I can make for my health, my energy, my mental clarity, and my sleep quality. As I step outside into the morning air, I immediately assess the conditions. Sometimes the sky is completely clear, a perfect blue canvas with the sun visible as a bright disk rising from the horizon or sitting low in the eastern sky. Times there might be scattered clouds, white and fluffy or gray and heavy, partially obscuring the sun. And on some mornings, the entire sky is blanketed with thick cloud cover, creating that flat, diffuse light that makes everything look muted and soft. When I step outside and see that the sun is low in the sky, positioned at what scientists call a low solar angle, I know my timing is excellent. This low position of the sun relative to the horizon is exactly what I'm looking for. The sun doesn't need to be barely peeking over the horizon, but it shouldn't be directly overhead either. That morning position, when the sun is maybe 20 or 30 or 40 degrees above the horizon, provides the ideal type of light for what I'm trying to accomplish. Even if clouds are scattered across the sky, even if I can't pinpoint exactly where the sun is located behind those clouds, I know that I'm still doing something tremendously beneficial for my physiology. In fact, on those cloudy mornings, it becomes even more important that I get myself outside because the clouds diffuse and scatter the sunlight, reducing its intensity, which means I need to spend more time exposed to it to receive the same biological benefit. Explain what happens on a morning when the sky is crystal clear and I can see the sun's position with perfect clarity. I don't need to stare directly at that bright orb in the sky. In fact, depending on how low the sun is sitting and how bright it appears, not want to look directly at it at all. When the sun is very low, just after sunrise, when it's still that beautiful orange or golden color, it often isn't painful to look toward it. The atmosphere has scattered much of the blue light, and the intensity is reduced enough that my eyes can handle brief direct viewing without discomfort. But as the sun rises higher, as it climbs toward its midday position, it becomes progressively brighter and more intense. If I were outside an hour or two after sunrise, the sun might be bright enough that looking directly at it would cause discomfort or even pain in my eyes. And that's a signal I need to respect because pain is my body's way of telling me that something could cause damage. The technique I use for this morning light exposure is quite simple and doesn't require any uncomfortable staring or eye strain. I position myself outside where I have a clear view of the general area of the sky where the sun is located. Simply look in that direction toward the sun, orienting my face and my gaze so that the light from that region of the sky enters my eyes. If the sun is bright enough that looking directly at it creates discomfort, I just look near it instead. I might look at a point in the sky 15 or 20 degrees to the left or right of the sun, or slightly above or below it. The key is that my eyes are receiving the bright light from that portion of the sky. I'm not looking down at the ground. I'm not looking off to the side at the trees or buildings. I'm looking up and toward the source of light. As I stand there, blink naturally whenever my eyes feel the need to blink. Blinking is a normal, healthy reflex that keeps my eyes lubricated and comfortable, and there's absolutely no reason to suppress it. I might blink every few seconds, or maybe I can hold my eyes open for longer stretches. Doesn't matter. The important thing is that I'm allowing light to enter my eyes during this time period. Crucial rule I follow is to never look at any light source, whether it's the sun or an artificial light or anything else, if it's so bright that it causes pain. Pain is a warning signal, and when it comes to vision, I take those warnings seriously because eye damage can be permanent and irreversible. So if the sun is painfully bright to look at, I don't look at it, I look near it, or I allow the light to reach my eyes through my peripheral vision. I don't force myself to stare at something that hurts. That said, for this morning's sunlight viewing practice, I deliberately choose not to wear sunglasses. This might seem counterintuitive because we're often told to protect our eyes from the sun, but there's an important distinction to understand here. For this specific practice, during this specific time of day, with the sun at this specific angle, I want the full intensity of that natural light to reach the specialized cells in my eyes. C's would filter out too much of that light and reduce the effectiveness of what I'm trying to accomplish. Now, normally wear eyeglasses or contact lenses for vision correction. I absolutely keep those on during this practice. In fact, wearing my corrective lenses actually helps because they focus the incoming light more precisely onto the back of my eye, onto the retina where the light-sensitive cells are located. There's a specific type of cell in the retina called a melanopsin intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cell. These cells are the primary detectors for the kind of light exposure I'm pursuing right now. These aren't the rods and cones that let me see images and colors and details. These are specialized cells that detect overall light levels and use that information to regulate my circadian rhythms, my sleep-wake cycle, my alertness, and various other biological functions. When my corrective lenses focus light onto these cells, they're actually enhancing the signal that my brain receives. Even if my eyeglasses or contact lenses have some UV protection built into them, perfectly fine. The sun emits light across a broad spectrum of wavelengths, from ultraviolet through visible light to infrared, and even with UV protection, more than enough light of the right wavelengths will reach those specialized retinal cells to trigger the mechanisms I'm trying to activate. Goal is to get outside and do this viewing practice as soon as possible after waking up. Ideally, I'm outside within 5 minutes of opening my eyes for the day. Maybe that's not always realistic. Maybe it takes me 10 or 15 minutes to get out of bed, use the bathroom, throw on some clothes, and make my way to the door. That's acceptable. The key is to do this within the first hour after waking, and the earlier within that hour, the better. If I can manage it in the first 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, that's optimal. If it stretches to 30 or 40 minutes, it's still beneficial. But if I wait 2 or 3 hours after waking to get this light exposure, I've missed the crucial window when my body is most responsive to this signal. I want to share 3 critical pieces of information about this practice that will help you understand why it matters so much and how to think about it properly. First, this isn't some alternative wellness trend or unproven health hack. This isn't based on speculation or anecdote or somebody's personal theory about how the body works. This is grounded in fundamental physiology, in the core mechanisms that regulate human biology. There are literally hundreds and more likely thousands peer-reviewed scientific papers published in respected journals showing that light exposure early in the day is the single most powerful stimulus for promoting wakefulness and alertness during the daytime hours. These same studies show that this morning light exposure has a profound positive impact on your ability to fall asleep easily at night and to maintain deep, restorative sleep throughout the night. This isn't a minor effect or a subtle benefit that only certain people might notice. This is a foundational tool, a cornerstone practice that affects the very core of how your brain and body function across the full 24-hour cycle. When you get this right, when you provide your brain with the light signal it expects in the morning, you set yourself up for better energy, better focus, better mood, better performance during the day, and better sleep at night. Second, I need to address what happens when you wake up before the sun has risen. Maybe you wake up at 4 in the morning, or 5, or 6 during the winter months when sunrise comes late. If you wake up when it's still dark outside and your goal is to be awake and functional, then you absolutely should turn on artificial lights inside your home. If you need to be awake at 4 in the morning, you don't sit there in the dark waiting for the sun to eventually rise hours later. You flip on the lights in your bedroom, your bathroom, your kitchen, whatever rooms you're moving through. These artificial lights, even though they're not bright enough to trigger the full cortisol response and circadian setting mechanisms that morning sunlight provides, still better than darkness if you need to be awake and active. They provide some signal to your brain that it's time to be alert, even if it's not the optimal signal. However, and this is crucial, once the sun does rise, once dawn breaks and natural light becomes available, you still need to get outside and view that sunlight. Artificial lights you turned on before sunrise don't replace or negate the need for natural sunlight exposure once it becomes available. This is where people sometimes get confused. They think that if they've been exposed to bright indoor lighting for a couple of hours before sunrise, somehow already received the light exposure they need. But that's not how it works. The artificial lights in your home, even if they're quite bright by indoor standards, are not nearly bright enough to activate the mechanisms we're talking about. Unless you have a very special type of light, a specific therapeutic light designed to deliver the same intensity and spectrum as sunlight. Your regular household lights simply won't do the job. Here's the tricky and somewhat frustrating aspect of this situation. Artificial lights in your home, the ones that aren't bright enough to properly wake you up and set your circadian rhythms in the morning, are actually bright enough to disrupt your sleep if you're exposed to them late at night or in the middle of the night. There's an asymmetry, imbalance in how your visual system and your brain respond to light depending on the time of day. In the morning, shortly after waking, your brain needs a very strong light signal, a high intensity of light, lots of photons flooding into your eyes, trigger the awakening mechanisms to release cortisol, to set your circadian clock, initiate all the processes that promote alertness and focus. Artificial lights in your home generally can't provide enough intensity to accomplish this effectively. But at night, when your brain is trying to wind down, when you're approaching bedtime, or if you wake up in the middle of the night, even relatively dim artificial lights can interfere with your sleep processes. Even a small amount of light exposure at the wrong time can suppress melatonin production, shift your circadian rhythms in unhelpful directions, can make it harder to fall asleep or return to sleep. If you wake up before sunrise while it's still dark outside, here's what you should do. Turn on as many bright artificial lights as you can or need to support your wakefulness and your morning activities. Don't stumble around in the dark. But then, as soon as the sun rises, as soon as natural light becomes available, make it a priority to get yourself outside for that sunlight exposure. Don't skip it just because you've already been awake for a couple of hours with the indoor lights on. Those indoor lights didn't give you what you really need. On cloudy days, this becomes even more important. When the sky is overcast, thick clouds are blocking the direct view of the sun, you especially need to make sure you get outside. I'm going to repeat that because it's counterintuitive for many people. On cloudy, overcast days, you especially need to get outside and get sunlight exposure. The clouds diffuse and scatter and reduce the intensity of the sunlight, which means you need to be exposed to it for a longer duration to receive the same biological benefit that you'd get from a shorter exposure on a clear day. But the light is, see you still there, still coming through those clouds, and it's still far brighter than any indoor lighting you have access to. How much time do you need to spend viewing this morning light? That's a question everyone asks. Unfortunately, there's no single answer that applies to every person in every situation. The amount of light exposure you need depends on several factors. It depends on where you live on the planet, what latitude you're at, because that affects the angle of the sun and the intensity of the light. It depends on the time of year. The sun's path across the sky changes with the seasons. It depends on your local environment. You're in an open area with clear views of the sky, or whether you're surrounded by tall buildings or dense tree cover that blocks some of the light. It depends on your individual eye sensitivity, because some people have eyes that are more sensitive to light while others have eyes that are less sensitive. Given all these variables, it's impossible to provide a precise prescription that works for everyone. I can offer some general guidelines that will get you in the right ballpark. On a clear day, when there's no cloud cover or only minimal clouds scattered across the sky, you want to aim for about 5 minutes of sunlight exposure to your eyes. This doesn't need to be exactly 5 minutes, timed with a stopwatch. Be 3 minutes one day, or 7 minutes another day, maybe 8 or 10 minutes if you're feeling like you want to spend more time outside. But roughly 5 minutes is the target. On a day when there's moderate cloud cover, when you can see the sun peeking through gaps in the clouds, or when the clouds create a hazy filter over the sun, you want to increase that duration to about 10 minutes. The clouds are reducing the intensity of the light reaching your eyes. You need more time to accumulate the same total amount of light energy. On days that are really heavily overcast, thick gray clouds completely blanket the sky, or on rainy days when the light levels are quite low, you might need to spend 20 or even 30 minutes outside getting that light exposure. This might sound like a lot of time, and you might be thinking that you don't have 30 minutes to stand outside every morning. But remember, you don't have to just stand there doing nothing. You can have your morning coffee outside. You can do some light stretching or movement. You can make a phone call. You can think through your plans for the day. The key is just that your eyes are exposed to the outdoor light during that time period. Another crucial point that I cannot emphasize enough is this: do not try to get this sunlight exposure through the windshield of a car or through a window, whether that window is tinted or clear. This is a mistake that many people make because it seems convenient. They think they can sit in their car during their morning commute and count that as their sunlight exposure, or they think they can sit by a window in their home with natural light streaming in, and that will be sufficient. But it simply doesn't work that way. Glass windows and car windshields filter out certain wavelengths of light, and more importantly, they reduce the overall intensity of the light that reaches your eyes. If you tried to get your morning light exposure through a window, you'd have to sit there for an extraordinarily long time to accumulate enough light to trigger the mechanisms we're discussing. By the time you'd gotten enough light through that window, the sun would have moved significantly across the sky, climbing from its low morning angle to a much higher position overhead. And once the sun is high in the sky, once it's moved past that low solar angle, the light no longer has the same effect on your circadian system. There are complex reasons for this related to how your brain interprets the spectrum and angle of incoming light, but the practical upshot is that you can't just wait until later in the day and expect the same benefits. Don't try to cheat the system by viewing sunlight through a windshield or sunglasses or a window. It's not going to work. You need to get outside where you have direct access to the outdoor light. Now, I understand that sometimes circumstances make this difficult or even impossible. Maybe the weather is extremely severe. Maybe there's a dangerous storm. Maybe you live in a location where going outside at a particular time would be unsafe for some reason. In those rare situations where you absolutely cannot get outside, then as a last resort, you could try to get near a window, as close to the window as possible, maybe even opening the window if that's feasible. But understand that this is a compromise, a backup option when the preferred approach isn't available. The window solution is far inferior to actually going outside. It's better than nothing if you truly have no other choice. In the vast majority of circumstances, though, you really want to make the effort to get outside to get this sunlight exposure. Let me paint a picture of what this might look like in practice across different scenarios. Imagine you wake up one morning and it's summer. The sun rises early, maybe around 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and the sky is clear and beautiful. You wake up at 6:30, right around sunrise or shortly after. You get out of bed, maybe you splash some water on your face, maybe you put on a robe or some comfortable clothes, and you head outside. Maybe you have a patio or a backyard. Maybe you just step out your front door onto the sidewalk or the street. You stand there or sit there and you look up toward the eastern sky where the sun is just beginning its climb. The sun is that gorgeous golden orange color that it often has near the horizon. And looking toward, it doesn't hurt your eyes at all. You spend 5 minutes there just taking in the morning, breathing the fresh air, noticing the temperature and the sounds of birds and the quality of the light. After 5 minutes, you head back inside and continue with your morning routine. That's it. Simple, straightforward, pleasant, incredibly powerful for your physiology. Now imagine a different scenario. It's winter and the sun doesn't rise until maybe 7:30 in the morning. You wake up at 6 and it's still pitch black outside. You turn on the lights in your bedroom and bathroom because you need to be able to see what you're doing. You go through your morning routine. Maybe you shower, get dressed, have breakfast, all with the indoor lights on. At 7:45, you notice that the sun has risen and natural light is now available. Even though you've been awake for almost 2 hours already, you stop what you're doing and you go outside. Maybe it's cold, so you bundle up in a coat and hat and gloves. You spend 10 minutes outside because there's some cloud cover today and you need that longer exposure. You're not enjoying the temperature, but you're getting the light exposure your brain needs. Then you head back inside, finish getting ready, and head off to work or whatever your day involves. Again, simple and manageable even when the conditions aren't ideal. One more scenario, rainy autumn day. The sky is completely overcast with thick gray clouds and rain is falling steadily. You wake up and look outside and think, there's no way you're going out in that weather. But then you remember how important this practice is, and you remember that on overcast, rainy days, you need this light exposure even more than on clear days. So you put on a rain jacket with a hood. Maybe you grab an umbrella and you step outside into the rain. You stand under your roof overhang or you hold the umbrella so it's not directly blocking your upward view, and you spend 20 minutes out there. Yes, it's not the most comfortable experience. Yes, you'd rather be inside where it's warm and dry, but you're investing 20 minutes in a practice that will improve your energy and focus for the entire day ahead and will help you sleep better that night. It's a trade-off that makes sense when you understand the benefits. I know that some of you are thinking about all the obstacles and challenges that might prevent you from doing this practice. You might work a night shift and sleep during the day. You might live in a place with extreme weather conditions. You might have very early work commitments that make it difficult to spend time outside. You might live in an apartment building where getting outside requires going down several flights of stairs or through multiple locked doors. You might have small children who need attention in the morning and can't easily be taken outside right after waking. These are all real challenges, and I'm not dismissing them. But I would encourage you to think creatively about how you might overcome them, at least partially address them, because the benefits are so substantial. Maybe you can take your children outside with you and make it part of a morning routine that involves some outdoor playtime. Maybe you can adjust your schedule slightly to create a 10-minute window for getting outside. Maybe you can plan your morning so that going outside doesn't feel like an extra task, but becomes integrated with something else you're already doing. Taking out the trash or walking to your car or checking the mail. For those of you who work night shifts and sleep during the day, the advice needs to be modified because your circadian system is operating on a different schedule. But the principle remains the same. You need bright light exposure at the time that corresponds to your morning, whenever your personal morning happens to be. If you sleep from 8 in the actual morning until 4 in the afternoon, then 4 in the afternoon, when you wake up, is your biological morning. That's when you need to get bright light exposure to set your circadian clock and promote alertness for your upcoming active period. The challenge is that if you're waking up at 4 in the afternoon, the sun might not be at the optimal low angle anymore, depending on the time of year. It might be getting close to sunset, or in winter, it might already be setting. This makes night shift work particularly challenging from a circadian perspective, and it's one of the reasons why night shift work is associated with various health problems. If you're in this situation, you might need to use artificial light sources that are bright enough to simulate daylight. Therapeutic lamps designed for this purpose, often marketed for seasonal affective disorder, that can deliver light intensities in the range of 10,000 lux, which is bright enough to trigger circadian responses. Using one of these lamps shortly after waking, even if you're waking in the afternoon or evening, can help regulate your circadian system. Science underlying all of this is fascinating and deep. Your eyes contain these specialized cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that I mentioned earlier. These cells contain a photopigment called melanopsin that is most sensitive to blue light in the range of around 480 nanometers wavelength. Light of this wavelength enters your eyes and hits these melanopsin containing cells, sends signals through a dedicated pathway to a region of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is located in the hypothalamus. Suprachiasmatic nucleus serves as your master circadian clock, coordinating all the various rhythms and cycles throughout your body. When your master clock receives the strong light signal in the morning through this melanopsin pathway, it initiates a cascade of events, triggers the release of cortisol from your adrenal glands, which promotes wakefulness and alertness. It adjusts the timing of various hormonal cycles. It influences your body temperature rhythm. It sets the stage for melatonin to be released at the appropriate time later in the evening when it starts getting dark. Without this morning light signal, your circadian clock can drift and become misaligned with the actual day-night cycle of the environment around you. This misalignment, circadian misalignment, has been linked to all sorts of negative health outcomes, including mood disorders, metabolic problems, increased risk of certain diseases, cognitive impairment, and of course, sleep disturbances. When your circadian clock is properly synchronized with the environmental light dark cycle, everything functions more smoothly. Your sleep quality improves because melatonin is released at the right time and your body temperature drops appropriately for sleep. Your daytime alertness improves because cortisol and other wakefulness promoting signals peak at the right time. Your mood tends to be more stable because various neurotransmitter systems are operating on their proper schedules. Even things like digestion and immune function follow circadian rhythms and work better when those rhythms are properly aligned. The evolutionary context helps explain why this system exists and why it's so important. For millions of years, ancestors lived without artificial lighting. The only source of bright light was the sun. Their sleep-wake cycles were naturally synchronized with sunrise and sunset because they had no choice in the matter. They woke up when the sun rose because it became bright and warm, and they went to sleep when it got dark because there was nothing else to do and no safe way to see. Their circadian systems evolved to expect this pattern, to use the morning light as a reliable signal that a new day had begun. Use the evening darkness as a signal that it was time to rest. Our modern environment has changed radically in just the past century or so with the advent of electric lighting, but our biology hasn't changed. We still have the same circadian systems, the same light-sensitive cells in our retinas, the same brain structures that respond to light signals. The problem is that we now live in a world where we can create artificial light whenever we want, where we can stay inside buildings away from natural light, where our exposure to light bears very little relationship to the natural day, night cycle. This mismatch between our biology and our environment is causing significant problems for many people. Deliberately choosing to get outside and expose yourself to bright natural light shortly after waking, you're essentially giving your body the signal it evolved to expect and use. You're working with your biology rather than against it. You're taking advantage of a built-in mechanism that, when properly activated, promotes better health and functioning across multiple domains. And the beauty of this intervention is that it's free, it's natural, it requires no special equipment in most cases, and it has essentially no negative side effects when done properly. You're not taking a drug or a supplement that might have interactions or adverse effects. You're not undergoing some complex treatment protocol. You're simply stepping outside and allowing natural light to enter your eyes for a few minutes. It's remarkably simple for something so powerful. I want to address some common questions and concerns that come up when people first learn about this practice. One question is whether you can do this through a window if it's a very large window with no tint or coating. While a large clear window is better than a small or tinted window, it's still not as effective as being outside. Even clear glass blocks some wavelengths of light and reduces overall intensity. More importantly, the geometry of being inside looking through a window means you're often not getting light from the full expanse of sky the way you do when you're outside. When you're outside, light is coming at you from many directions, from a large portion of the sky, even if you're primarily looking in one direction. This creates a much stronger signal than looking through a window where the light is coming from a more limited area of the sky. So again, while a window is better than nothing in extreme circumstances, it's not a substitute for actually going outside. Another question people ask is whether they can get this light exposure later in the day. Maybe they can't get outside within the first hour of waking, but they could get outside at 10 in the morning or noon. Is that still beneficial? The answer is that it's somewhat beneficial, but significantly less so than getting the light early, shortly after waking. The key is not just getting bright light at some point during the day, but getting it at the right time relative to your wake time. Your circadian clock needs to know when your day is beginning, and it uses the first significant light exposure after waking as that signal. If you wake up at 6, but don't get bright light exposure until noon, your circadian clock receives a confusing or ambiguous signal. It's still better than getting no natural light exposure at all, but it's not optimal for setting your circadian rhythms properly. People also wonder whether they can wear a hat or a visor that shades their eyes from above. Baseball cap or similar hat won't completely block the light from reaching your eyes unless you're wearing it pulled down very low. It will reduce the amount of light getting in. For this practice, it's better to not wear a hat if possible. If you must wear one for sun protection or other reasons, at least try to tilt your head so that light can reach your eyes from below the brim. Remember, you're not trying to stare directly at the sun. You don't need an unobstructed view upward. You're trying to get bright light into your eyes from the general direction of the sun and sky. What about people who have various eye conditions or sensitivities? If you have a diagnosed eye condition, you should certainly consult with an eye doctor before dramatically changing your light exposure habits. But for most people with typical vision, including people who are nearsighted or farsighted, or who have mild astigmatism, this practice is safe when done as described. The key safeguard is to never look at light that's painful or uncomfortable. Pain is your body's warning system, and you should respect it. If you find that even brief exposure to outdoor light creates discomfort, start with very short durations, perhaps just 1 or 2 minutes, and gradually build up as your eyes adapt. People who have been living in very dim indoor environments find that their eyes are initially quite sensitive to bright light. This sensitivity often decreases over time as the eyes adapt. There's also the question of what to do if you use blackout curtains or eye masks to sleep in complete darkness at night. This is actually compatible with the morning light viewing practice. In fact, sleeping in complete darkness at night and getting bright light in the morning creates an ideal contrast that helps regulate your circadian system. The darkness at night promotes melatonin production and deep sleep, while the bright light in the morning triggers the awakening mechanisms. The combination of dark nights and bright mornings gives your body clear signals about when to sleep and when to be awake. If you're using blackout curtains or an eye mask and sleeping well at night, definitely keep doing that. Make sure you're getting that bright morning light exposure after you wake up. For those of you living in extreme northern or southern latitudes where the sun barely rises in winter or barely sets in summer, the advice needs to be adapted to your unique circumstances. During the dark winter months at high latitudes, the sun might only be above the horizon for a few hours per day or might not rise at all. You'll need to rely more heavily on artificial lighting. As I mentioned earlier, there are therapeutic lamps designed to deliver 10,000 lux or more, which can serve as a substitute for sunlight. Use one of these lamps for about 30 minutes shortly after waking. Position it so that the light reaches your eyes, but you're not staring directly into it. During the bright summer months at high latitudes, when the sun barely sets, your challenge is the opposite. You need to make sure you're getting adequate darkness at night to allow melatonin production and sleep. Blackout curtains or eye masks to create dark sleeping conditions even when the sun is still up outside. I've been talking a lot about the biological mechanisms and the science, but I also want to emphasize the experiential aspects of this practice. Many people find that beyond the physiological benefits, there's something deeply satisfying about starting the day with a few minutes outside in natural light. There's a psychological component to marking the beginning of your day with this ritual. It creates a moment of transition from sleep to wakefulness, from the private interior world of your home to the larger outside world. It can be a time for reflection, for taking a few deep breaths, for noticing the weather and the season and the subtle changes that happen day by day. In our modern lives, where so much time is spent indoors, where so much of our experience is mediated through screens and artificial environments, those few minutes outside connecting with natural light and the natural world can feel grounding and centering. People like to combine this morning light viewing with other practices. You might do some gentle stretching or yoga poses while you're outside. You might practice gratitude by thinking of 3 things you're grateful for while you're soaking in the morning sun. You might use it as a time for meditation or prayer. You might make it a social activity by doing it with a partner or family member and using it as time to connect and talk. You might bring your coffee or tea outside and make it part of a peaceful morning beverage routine. The practice is flexible enough to accommodate many different approaches and preferences. Only non-negotiable element is that you're getting the bright light into your eyes during that time. I should also mention that this morning light exposure practice works synergistically with another light-related practice, which is avoiding bright light exposure late in the evening. Just as bright light in the morning helps wake you up and set your circadian clock, bright light late at night can interfere with the mechanisms that help you wind down and prepare for sleep. In the hours before bedtime, it's beneficial to reduce your light exposure, particularly exposure to the blue wavelengths of light that your melanopsin cells are most sensitive to. This means dimming your lights in the evening, avoiding bright overhead lights if possible, and being mindful of your screen usage from phones, tablets, computers, and televisions. Many devices now have settings that reduce blue light emission in the evening, often called night mode or night shift. Using these settings or wearing blue light blocking glasses in the evening can help preserve your natural melatonin production. Combination of bright light in the morning and dim light in the evening creates a strong circadian signal, a clear contrast that helps your body maintain robust rhythms. It's like you're giving your circadian system a clear message. In the morning, you're saying, this is the beginning of the active phase, time to be alert and awake. In the evening, you're saying, the active phase is ending, time to start preparing for rest. When these signals are clear and consistent day after day, your circadian system can operate optimally, and all the functions that depend on proper circadian timing work better. Now, you might be wondering what happens if you miss a day or if you're inconsistent with this practice. The good news is that doing this practice most days is much better than not doing it at all, even if you can't do it every single day. Your circadian system has some built-in stability, so missing a day here or there won't completely derail everything. Consistency does matter. The more consistently you provide this morning light signal, the more robust and stable your circadian rhythms become. If you only do it occasionally, you'll get some benefit, not as much as if you do it regularly. Think of it like physical exercise. Working out once a month is better than never working out, but it won't give you the same benefits as working out regularly several times per week. Similarly, getting morning light exposure once a week is better than never getting it. Doing it most days, or ideally every day, will give you the full benefits. For people who travel across time zones, this morning light viewing practice becomes even more important because it can help you adapt to the new time zone more quickly. When you arrive in a new time zone, getting bright light exposure shortly after waking in that new location helps reset your circadian clock to the new schedule. Conversely, if you're trying to prepare for an upcoming trip to a different time zone, you can start shifting your light exposure patterns before you leave to help pre-adapt your circadian system. This is a whole topic in itself. The basic principle is the same light is the most powerful signal for setting your circadian clock, and you can use that principle strategically to manage jet lag. There are also interesting applications for people with certain medical conditions. Seasonal affective disorder, a type of depression that a Treathis response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message.